Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amor de Soi Wellness, and Donovan Jensen is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. And today we are talking about, is your happiness dependent on other people or just yourself? So, Donovan, where do you want to go with this?
Yeah, so my initial thoughts here are sort of the like purest, I don't know, most hardcore answer is probably yes, your happiness is dependent solely on yourself. However, taking that and running with it as like a practical way of being, I don't think is especially useful, right? Just to think like, oh, I'm not like an extremely stoic position of nothing influences me except myself. Like I'm in charge of everything. I have full control. I'm the one who determines my happiness. I don't think that's a practical or realistic way for most people to live. And while there is some benefit in sort of like adopting some of those principles or moving towards that to a degree, adopting that mindset fully, I feel like can take you out of a lot of the things that are useful for like cultivating relationships and developing happiness with others. That's my first couple of thoughts. I'd be curious where you are.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree. I mean, in theory, I think it should be kind of based on ourselves, and we are the creator of our own happiness. But in reality, I don't know if that necessarily manifests, given that we do have to interact with people. Because I was just thinking, like, people in solitude, maybe if they're super advanced, they could be fine, perfectly happy with that. But, I think at a certain point, we do need to interact with other human beings. And it's generally kind of how most of us go about our day to day, is we do have to interact with other people at some point. But does our happiness have to be dependent on that? Not necessarily, but I think, we've touched on this before a lot, how human connection is so important for happiness. I think a few episodes back, we were talking about the three most important things for happiness, and one of them was connection. So I think we do have to generate happiness from ourselves. That's should be a priority, but there's a lot of factors involved. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, I think like one of the I'm gonna go back to sort of this like stoic idea because I don't know, I feel like it's a very stoic idea to think that you are the sole determinant of your happiness. And I think if you push too far along that axis, you end up missing something, right? And maybe if you've really spent a lot of time with it, you can find a mental space where you're actually able to distance yourself and get the full benefits of these relationships. But like Stoics would say things like, just like don't be sad if one of your kids dies because you can always just have another one, like, and those sorts of ideas are like, that's like pushing that principle to its extreme. And I feel like in one sense, it is useful to be able to detach emotionally from certain external things, including people and their actions and whatnot. But at a certain point, you end up actually forfeiting sort of some of the things you put on the line by fully investing emotionally in your relationships, right? Like I'll just use, this child example in the same way. Like if you are fully invested in your child's like growth and happiness and sort of that relationship and whatnot, you put on the line sort of a risk of like, well, if they get hurt or whatever else, like you're going to feel a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's where this distinction comes in, where it's like relationships can very easily produce negative like pleasure, but if you are factoring in purpose, which generally for most people, like the vast majority of people, is a higher priority, relationships need to be really, really high priority. Otherwise, you end up just sort of like shuttering away something that is potentially very, very meaningful to sort of flatten out your pleasure curve or like your emotional curve.
Yeah, no, I think in general are, I mean, we shouldn't necessarily have to depend on other people for our happiness, but it kind of is like we should find happiness within ourselves. But like having people in our lives enriches our lives, it enhances our lives, it makes us feel more fulfilled and happier generally. Not necessarily the case. I could see the flip side of this argument, where I think of go back to like the younger generation of needing constant validation from social media, from external sources to feel happy versus and I think that's a totally different thing compared to like having relationships with people to fuel your happiness.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction, and one I was actually about to bring up too, which is like I do believe there is a version of relying on others for your happiness that is very unhealthy.
Yeah.
One of the clearest examples to me, or like something I've seen most commonly, is people who don't feel like they can be happy unless they have a romantic partner.
Yes.
And they are searching for someone to sort of fill the gaps in their emotional well-being or their purpose or whatever else,
Right.
as opposed to sort of having a life that they already feel like is meaningful or purposeful or pleasurable or whatever else, and then looking for people in terms of like, oh, a partner. I think I would love to share that my life and
Yeah.
experience with someone, and I think that would enhance things more.
Right.
I think that's like the healthier position to be in, but there are definitely, I think we started by kind of like walking the line around like, should you have people in your life? And I think the more common and more often unhealthy version is the one where people are thinking like, I must have someone to fill these certain gaps in me or in my life, otherwise I can't be happy. And that's I think a dangerous mindset to be in.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And whenever I hear people say, "Oh, I need this person to complete me," or "I'm looking for the person to complete me," and it just makes me cringe a little bit because I'm like, no, you need to be complete and whole on your own first and foremost. Because if it's like if you're incomplete and they're incomplete and you try to merge parties, it's like at some point that person's going to disappoint me, let you down. It's like, yeah, people are people, and if you are completely dependent on that other person for your happiness, that could be a very unhealthy balance. And I think, I feel like for me personally, especially in the dating realm, when I was dating, I was much more happier and fulfilled or more secure when I was more confident and secure in myself and not like seeking a relationship to fulfill me or complete me. I was not so needy. I was like, it was easier to let go of a relationship that didn't serve me, wasn't healthy for me, than when I was coming from the mindset of like, oh, I need this person to complete me. I need to be in a relationship. And that usually did not really help the relationship grow further.
Yeah, I think because it puts you in such a uh it's just I don't know what other word to use besides unhealthy, but it's just like when you feel like so much is dependent on other people, you can cling to them in ways that are very unpleasant and straining on the relationship.
Yeah.
And in the same way, when both people are in that space, you can get some really like toxic codependent or other types of just negative behaviors
Right.
that leave both people with some amount of, I guess, comfort or security, but at the cost of an actually like pleasant and uh healthy and growing relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I look back at when I started dating my current partner, I actually I remember specifically that I was actually just very happy being single. I was just doing what I wanted, whenever I wanted, enjoying life, going out with friends, traveling, doing all these things and just living life up to the fullest. And so when he did come into my life, it was just like the cherry on top. And And yeah, you know, sometimes I'm like, oh man, I miss my single days, but it like, you know, there's pros and cons to being singles, there's pros and cons to being in a relationship. And you know, even still, it's like, you know, I'm happy with my relationship and fulfilled. And we've continued to grow and together in many different ways and gotten through lots of struggles. But you know, at the same time, I can remember a time being happy single. And I think that was creating a good foundation for me to be in a relationship.
Yeah, I feel like you really have to be able to at least have some grasp. You don't have to be perfect, but
Yeah.
you have to at least sort of have a grasp on your life and
Mhm.
what your life looks like independent of someone else before you can really, from a comfortable place,
Mhm.
grow and develop a relationship.
Yeah.
I think we covered sort of like the relationship angle pretty well. There's another angle I kind of wanted to dig
Yeah.
in on a little bit, which is family sort of relationships.
Mhm.
So, um, again, like just coming at this concept of being dependent on other people for your happiness. I remember very distinctly, like when I was younger, right,
Mhm.
being so frustrated with my parents all the time over all kinds of
Mhm.
random things. And I feel like over time, I've been able to gain more tools around like what's the best way to put this? Like finding the right amount of involvement and investment in the
Mhm.
activities of my family for myself. You
Yeah.
know, maybe a more clear example is like my younger siblings have made some choices that I've just been like, oh my god, like I have to do something about this. I have to
Mhm.
like step in and force them to figure out how to do this the right way or whatever else,
Mhm.
and realizing over time that like in a way that actually was me depending on them for my happiness in the sense of I
Mhm.
needed them or expected them to act a certain way for me to feel good and otherwise got like really frustrated and whatever else. And over time I've realized like there's only so much influence or like interaction or pressure that I should be applying in those
Mhm.
relationships to be useful. You know, like I only have so much responsibility and influence and whatever else, and the
Mhm.
rest is up to them. And I feel like that in a roundabout way is another way that I have realized that my happiness was very strongly dependent on other people's
Mhm.
actions as opposed
Mhm.
to relying on sort of how I show up in those relationships, which is a lot more where I
Yeah.
focus now. But I'd be curious what your feelings are on some of those topics.
Yeah, no, I can see that. You know, I've seen a lot of parent-child relationships probably mirroring that, where, you know, the parent is imposing what they want the child to do, or maybe they're living vicariously through their child because they didn't get to do it when they were a kid, or for whatever reason. And because I think it's, even though they think they are helping the child reach happiness in their mind because they think, oh, well, if I had done that when I was a kid, that would have made me happy. I don't I don't know if they actually factor in or receive the feedback from the child to see if it's actually helping them feel happier or more fulfilled or whatever that might be. So I think it's good to kind of develop awareness of, and communication skills, obviously, if we always go back to the communication aspect of kind of seeing, is my happiness, if I'm trying to like impose this thing on my child because I think it'll make them happy, but really it's all about me.
Yeah, I feel like I've gotten mileage on both sides of the equation, right? Which is
Yeah.
like not trying to impose my stuff as much.
Yeah.
And I've also gotten mileage out of sort of when other people that I'm close to that I care about and value their opinion give me opinions that don't line up with things that I'm interested or want to pursue or whatever else.
Mhm.
I feel like when I was younger, they used to weigh so much more heavily on me, and it took
Mhm.
time of like developing a mindset around like kind of the same things that you were saying, which is like this person wants what they think is going to be useful for me.
Right.
They're not saying, and sometimes that message is delivered horribly.
Yeah.
Right. Like
Yeah.
sometimes like I specifically remember my grandma saying like, why are you studying psychology? That's stupid and a waste of time. You're gonna be poor. Like
Mhm.
study something of value.
Mhm.
And at the time I was really frustrated and upset.
Yeah.
And looking back now, it's just like, well, from her perspective, that's what she thought would lead to a good life versus a bad life. And like opinion's not necessarily correct. But
Yeah.
the difference being that as I've gotten a better understanding of people's sort of positions, it's
Mhm.
been easier for me to divorce my happiness from their actions because it's like,
Yeah.
okay, cool, I can see this clearly for what it is, as opposed to like, oh, my grandma hates me, or she thinks I'm a bad person, or like she thinks I'm
Right.
stupid, or whatever else.
Yeah.
Even if those things are true as well, it's like, okay, well, the intent here is something
Mhm.
positive.
Right.
The way this message is coming across is not good, or like this is just misguided. But that has allowed me to get more, but in a way that I think is useful, more on that stoic side of like,
Mm.
cool, these opinions or whatever else I can internalize them or not. Like I have a choice here,
Right.
and that's helped me to like take dependence off of other people for my happiness for a lot of sort of opinionated things.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I've had a similar experience with I remember when I was about to start medical school, my mom's friend, thankfully not my own mother, but one of my mother's friend who's old fashioned was like, why would you go to medical school? You know, by the time you finish, no one will, you'll be too old that nobody will want to marry you. It's like, wow. Yeah. So, I mean, that's still like it kind of like definitely irritated me hearing that. But now looking back, I kind of laugh at it because it's just so ridiculous. And yeah, I get that it's from her perspective, her culture. It's like, yeah, women's purpose is to get married, not to get an education. And apparently there's like a cutoff deadline of when you get too old at like 27 or 8 when I finished med school. Yeah.
I think that's another good thing to keep in mind, which is a lot of people express their opinions in black and white terms
Mhm. Yeah.
when it's just their perspective. Like when I was younger, it was much harder for me to understand because I didn't have
Mhm.
as much experience in the world. And now it's a lot easier to see like, oh, this person speaks this thing as though it's 100% true because from where they're sitting, it is like that's what they believe genuinely,
Yeah.
right? Like for her, for example, she probably didn't have any experience other than
Mhm.
sort of like, okay, women over the age of 30 have a very hard time getting married. Like that's what I've seen, that's what I'm used to. Like,
Yeah.
and then you think about sort of like the priorities or whatever else, the values of like, and then if you can't do that, you can't have a family. And like, and family is the main thing to be aiming for. So like this
Right.
is not a good choice. Like I need to help her get on a path to have a better
Yeah.
life.
Right.
Um, but I think it helped me a lot as I got older to realize that regardless of how, well, it's kind of hard, right? Because people who are older
Mhm.
or have certain experiences have certain experiences. So they
Right.
do have valuable information, but you have to take everything with a grain of salt because it's all from a snapshot of the world. Like
Mhm.
everyone's viewpoint is limited to whatever experience they've had. You
Right.
know, it's kind of like when I hear people grumbling about like, oh, like nobody should, everybody's just on their phone all the time and da 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 whatever, whatever. And like, yeah, I'm sure there was the same grumblings when other things came out. I mean, in fact, I know there is. Like I've seen it, right? Like television's gonna ruin everyone, or like the
Yeah.
radio is the worst thing ever invented. You know,
Yeah.
these kinds of opinions are just given from a snapshot. So you always have to take things with a grain of salt.
Yeah. Definitely. Agreed. But kind of switching gears, I was thinking we touched on the romantic relationships and how maybe it's not the healthiest thing to kind of want a romantic relationship to complete you or fulfill you. But like reflecting back on my single days when I was like, a relationship would be nice, but I don't necessarily need it kind of mindset. But I was, I think I was purposely, intentionally trying to get out and meet more people. Even as just friends, I was traveling uh, solo and meeting people. And I was also making a more of an effort to connect with friends. So I was like, was I just substituting happiness in a relationship with other people, or how is that different? And I just was curious on your opinion on that.
Yeah, I think the main thing you highlighted is sort of this traveling piece, right? It's
Yeah.
like you were doing something else that
Hmm.
allowed you to meet other people. And if you had
Yeah.
ulterior motives, that may have hindered you. But
Hmm.
like generally, what I've found is when I'm talking about like, oh, your life is like more secure, put together, or whatever else, it's more that you're pursuing things other than simply having relationships for the sake of
Right.
um, getting something for yourself. Like it's a very transactional mindset actually to think about like, oh, I want this partner so they can like fix all my problems and complete me.
Right.
Um, so I think in the limited amount of information you gave, I think the
Mhm.
difference is when you are pursuing sort of your own goals, you have sort of an idea or a sense of something you want to accomplish or that you're
Mhm.
working towards or whatever else, and you meet people in that process. I think
Yeah.
that's a more genuine and healthy way to sort of do things.
Hmm.
In the same way, like when you're dating with sort of this like very strong grip on like I have to find someone to fix things for me, that's a
Right.
very unhealthy place to come from. But if you're just dating and meeting people with the mindset of like
Hmm.
I'm just going to meet people, see how it goes.
Hmm.
Hopefully I find some people that I connect with. If I don't, like that's fine.
Yeah.
I feel like sort of the intention and sort of the broader picture of what's going on in your life makes a big difference as to whether or not it's
Mm.
like more or less healthy or more or less likely to produce something that's actually of value or able to like grow into something authentic.
Yeah. No, definitely. I concur with that. And it was even when I was in the process of dating people, it was, I think how dating was different in my 30s versus my 20s was that I was more relaxed about it because I was, even though for a serious relationship, yeah, there's certain values that I would like my partner to have. So there's, I guess, the little check boxes. But when it wasn't so much about like, oh, I need to meet my person I'm going to spend the rest of my life with, versus like, I'm just going to meet people and be curious about them. And, maybe they turn into a romantic partner. Maybe they just turn into a friend. Maybe it's just this person I'm only going to meet one time ever in my life. So might as well make it interesting for me rather than be bored and be like, oh, well, this person doesn't check all my check boxes. So I'm just going to suffer through this and then never talk to them again. I was like, if I'm taking the time and effort to go out and meet an individual, whether if I don't feel the chemistry, I'm like, I still want to have an enjoyable evening. I'm going to make it interesting somehow and enjoyable, even if there's zero chemistry. And maybe they'll become a friend, maybe they won't, but that's kind of how I went about it. And it was a lot more fun for sure.
Yeah, it also reminds me of sort of the time when I was in some of these like men's dating circles of
Mhm.
like just men like confused trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because the vast majority of guys that showed up to that kind of stuff were like, I'm really frustrated. I can't get any woman to notice me. I can't go on dates. If I do, they'd go horrible,
Yeah.
they et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And almost invariably when you start asking these people like, well, what are you
Yeah.
doing in your own life for yourself?
Yeah.
They would have like one small thing or none, but only with the focus of looking better for the dating scene, right? So, for example,
Mhm.
it'd be like, oh, I started working out so that I can be fit so that women will notice me.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's just interesting to me because if you sit down and think for a minute about like what's going to be attractive in a partner,
Mhm.
like and obviously men and women have different things that they look for, but like you flip the script and it's like I don't do anything. I have a career that I don't really like at all.
Mhm.
I go to the gym, but only so guys give me attention or girls give me attention.
Mhm.
And like you just sort of like list out what the structure of their life looks like and goals and priorities.
Yeah.
It's either very vain or just like empty.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's um a trap that a lot of people get sucked into. I don't know what it's like on the women's side because I haven't been in those circles, but It's a trap that men get sucked into of just like this. How can I be like more charming? How can I,
Mhm.
what's the opener that I need to use or whatever else, instead of focusing on the stuff that actually matters for developing those relationships, which is like, what is the overall content of my life? It's not like,
Mhm.
oh, I need to say a couple more clever lines. It's like, what
Right.
direction are you moving in? Because then you can find the sorts of people who are on the same path or like
Mhm.
interested in the same things and move together, as opposed to trying to sort of like use the right phrasing to tickle people's brain.
Yeah. No, I could definitely, when I was dating, get a sense when a guy was kind of like almost following some sort of formula or like, ooh, if I do this, or versus, generally getting a sense of they're just being their authentic selves, and that's a little more attractive for sure. um than like, oh, if I say this and this and use these pickup lines and do XYZ, yeah, it doesn't always pan out so well.
Well, and a lot of those guys, they're so worried about the outcomes, right? Their
Mhm.
happiness is 100% dependent on
Mhm.
on how these like dates or interactions or whatever else goes. And again, like, I don't know exactly how it bleeds through, but it always does in terms of like whatever your like intentions and overall mindset and your just like frame and your, I guess it
Mhm.
bleeds into like your body language and your word choice and
Yeah.
tone and stuff, but it almost invariably comes out in a
Mhm.
way that is not positive or beneficial. And
Yeah.
so it's just so much more useful to focus on sort of these internal uh principles is not necessarily the right word, but just sort of like having a direction that you're going towards and things that you have independent of sort of chasing these relationships and whatnot. There's no magic words or pickup line or anything that you can use to sort of like get past the fact that if you're just chasing positive validation, same thing that you're talking about with social media before,
Yeah.
like if you're just chasing positive validation,
Mhm.
um that's not a firm foundation to sort of build things from.
Yeah, totally. All right, well, I think we covered this topic pretty well. Were there any final thoughts you wanted to share before we wrap up?
I think the main thing is, just from that original conversation, I've
Mhm.
heard some people try to get on a path that's so stoic that they are try to shut down their emotions in relationships,
Mhm.
and I just feel like that's you give up sort of the highs and lows for something more flat, and for the vast majority of people, there's definitely something worth pursuing there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I do the one thing I want to add too, I just thought of as you were talking, is that I think there is some value in having alone time to self-reflect and kind of look inward to see what makes you happy. I think that's valuable versus like constantly having to be around others to kind of fuel your happiness essentially. But so I think the overall place we're landing is that yes, happiness does need to kind of come from you, but also at the same time, there's healthy ways to have relationships and not healthy ways to have relationships, and how you navigate that can help determine real happiness.
Yeah. On that note, I think it's just important to recognize that like how you show up for things, how you
Mhm.
show up in your relationships is
Yeah,
the thing that you're in control of. That is the thing that I think is
totally.
most useful to focus on is how
Mhm.
like how can I be like a nice space for other people to reflect on and then these
Yeah.
things and sort of focus on the sets of activities that cultivate relationships and that is a healthy way to sort of approach them as
Mhm.
opposed to really focusing in on what other people are doing, how they're reacting, what you want out of them. Those sorts of things I think are very unhealthy ways of sort of looking at relationships.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in this week. We appreciate you. And if you appreciate us, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and help spread the happiness in the world. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please take a second to subscribe as it really helps out a lot. If you're looking for more content, there's all sorts of information over at howtohappy.com. And if you want something a little bit more condensed and concise, I've also written the book Mindscaping, which is essentially a framework for optimizing happiness. So we'll have the link there as well. And that's all I've got. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.